subscribe to this channel right now. Because the story you're about to hear doesn't start with betrayal, it starts with silence. And silence is often the most dangerous place for secrets to grow. This is not a story about scandal. It's not about shock value. It's about what happens when loneliness disguises itself as connection, and when a single crossed line quietly fractures a family from the inside out. Stay until the end, because what unfolds isn't what you expect, and the moment everything breaks is not the moment you think it will be. The evening settled gently over the small Oregon town, the way it always did, slow, muted, almost polite. Early autumn had painted the streets in faded gold and rust, and the air carried that familiar mix of cool wind and falling leaves that made everything feel paused, as if the world itself had taken a breath. Margaret Lewis stood by the living room window of the house she'd lived in for nearly 2 decades, her fingers resting lightly on the curtain's edge. Outside, leaves scraped softly across the sidewalk, chasing each other in small, restless circles. It was peaceful, predictable, comforting. And yet, something felt off. Margaret was 51 years old, a widow for 6 long years, and a woman who had learned how to survive grief by building a life made of quiet strength. She woke early. She worked steady hours at the local library. She cooked simple meals. She didn't chase excitement, she protected stability. Routine wasn't boring to her. Routine was safety. That evening was supposed to be no different from any other. No surprises, no tension. Just another calm night in a house that had known both love and loss. Until the front door opened. It was later than usual. The sound itself wasn't loud, but it cut through the stillness like a crack in glass. Margaret didn't turn right away. She didn't need to. Something inside her shifted before her mind could catch up. A mother's intuition doesn't announce itself. It whispers. Her son, Ethan, stepped inside. He was tall, now taller than his father had ever been, broad-shouldered, thoughtful, 23 years old and still carrying traces of the boy she had raised alone after loss reshaped their lives. His jacket was half-zipped, his movements quick, almost rehearsed, as if he wanted the moment to pass before it had time to become anything. He smiled, but it wasn't his real smile. It was thin, controlled, practiced. Margaret noticed instantly. Mothers always do, especially mothers who have navigated grief, responsibility, and love without a partner to share the weight. She had raised Ethan not with lectures, but with presence, not with rules shouted aloud, but with values lived quietly every day. "Hey," she said gently, "you're home late." "Yeah," he replied too quickly, "just lost track of time." She asked how his day had been. "Fine." One word. Flat, closed. Before she could ask anything else, Ethan turned toward the stairs, climbing them 2 at a time. His footsteps faded, leaving behind a silence sharper than any argument. Margaret stood there for a long moment, her reflection faint in the glass. She told herself not to overthink it. Young adults change. Distance is normal. Independence requires space. But as she turned back toward the window, a memory surfaced uninvited. Her husband's voice, years ago, calm and certain. "Intuition is just truth knocking softly." Margaret felt a small ache settle in her chest. Not fear, not anger. Awareness. Something had begun. Over the next few days, the feeling didn't fade, it sharpened. Ethan spent more time on his phone. He stepped outside to take calls. He laughed softly to himself, then went quiet the moment Margaret entered the room. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Screens turned dark too quickly. Margaret respected privacy. She always had. She believed trust wasn't enforced, it was offered. Still, the house began to feel slightly tilted, like furniture moved just an inch out of place. Nothing obvious, nothing dramatic, just enough to make balance uncertain. On Wednesday afternoon, while Margaret was shelving returned books at the library, her phone vibrated in her pocket. Claire Bennett, her closest friend for over 10 years, Margaret smiled instinctively until she heard Claire's voice. It was tight, careful, controlled in a way that felt unnatural, like someone choosing words the way you step across cracked ice. "Margaret, could we meet later, just to talk?" No explanation. No warmth. "Of course," Margaret said, already feeling the shift. They met at a small cafe near the river, a place filled with soft music and quiet conversations, a place that had witnessed years of shared laughter and comfort. Claire was already there when Margaret arrived. Her coffee sat untouched. Her hands were folded tightly together. She didn't look up right away. Margaret barely had time to sit before Claire took a slow breath, the kind people take before saying something that cannot be unsaid. "I need to be honest," Claire said quietly. "Not because I want to, but because not being honest is hurting everyone." The words landed heavy. Then came the truth. Claire spoke carefully, as if each sentence might shatter something fragile. She explained that over the past few weeks, Ethan had grown close to her. It started innocently long conversations about life, about grief, about feeling lost. Conversations that felt supportive, harmless. At first, but slowly, something shifted. The talks grew deeper, more personal, emotionally heavy, until Claire felt uncomfortable in a way she couldn't ignore. Ethan had confessed feelings. Not physical, not inappropriate in action, but emotional. And that confession alone had crossed a line. Margaret listened without interrupting. Her face remained calm, but her mind raced, trying to understand how two people she trusted completely had wandered into such a fragile space. Claire insisted nothing improper had happened. She had ended the conversations the moment she realized where they were heading. But the damage had already been done. Because some boundaries don't require action to be broken. They only require permission. Margaret felt the pain settle slowly, not like a storm, but like fog, dulling, disorienting. It wasn't jealousy she felt. It wasn't betrayal in the traditional sense. It was grief. Grief for a boundary touched without care. Grief for trust bent instead of protected. When Margaret returned home that evening, the house felt different, quieter, heavier. Ethan sat at the kitchen table, waiting, hands folded, face pale. She knew then this wasn't rumor. This wasn't misunderstanding. This was real. Margaret didn't speak right away. She sat across from her son, the years between them stretching and collapsing all at once. She remembered him as a child asking why rules mattered, even when no one was watching. And how she had answered, "Rules exist to protect what we love, not to control it." Ethan looked up, guilt written plainly across his face. And something inside Margaret broke, not loudly, not dramatically, but deeply. She realized the peace she had felt only days earlier had been real and fragile. And its ending marked the beginning of a truth she could no longer turn away from. Margaret remained near the window long after the house had gone quiet, her reflection faint in the glass, layered over the darkening street outside. The leaves still moved along the sidewalk, but slower now, as if even they were settling into a new rhythm. Nothing around her looked different, and yet everything was. The home she had protected with routine and patience had been tested, not by chaos or anger, but by something far more subtle: confusion, loneliness, and a moment where wisdom arrived too late. Upstairs, Ethan sat alone, finally understanding that growing up wasn't about freedom alone, but about responsibility, the kind that asks you to consider the weight of your actions before you place them on someone else's heart. He hadn't lost his mother's love, but he had learned that love does not erase consequences. It teaches you how to live with them. Margaret knew the days ahead would not be simple. Trust, once stretched, takes time to settle back into place. Some conversations would always carry an echo now. Some silences would feel heavier than before. But there was also something new in the air: honesty. And honesty, even when painful, builds a stronger foundation than comfort ever could. As the night deepened, Margaret turned away from the window and switched off the light, carrying with her a quiet resolve. The peace she felt was no longer fragile or borrowed. It was earned through truth, held together by boundaries, and grounded in the understanding that love is not just about care, but about courage. And with that understanding, this chapter of their lives closed, not with everything restored, but with everything finally seen.